Up until recently, I think it's fair to say that most of the variants from STO don't have the best reputation among the wider fandom, and while recently Cryptic has been taking steps to address that problem, it's still fair to say that in a number of Starship classes, there are many hideous variants. Perhaps one of the best examples of Cryptic's, shall we say, troubling portfolio is in the Sovereign class assault cruiser. Silly name, but whatever. With the smorgasbord of Sovereign variants, most of which are completely hideous, from the Majestic class, which is, well, I don't know what's going on there, the Noble class, which is somehow worse, I don't know how it achieves that, the Imperial class, which is both intriguing and frightening at the same time, the Archon, which is just hideously deformed, and the Vizier, which is just like, well, you've taken a Sovereign class and you've painted it blue. Well done. There is, however, one exception, perhaps the ultimate, a Starship design which fully lives up to its name, something that is truly magnificent and regal in the Regent class. But before all that, we need to make a little trip to the neutral zone.
Captain, Romulan warbird decloaking ahead. Steady, Mr. Worf. Yellow alert. Captain, the warbird is hailing. On screen. Ah, Captain Picard. So nice to see you again. Is there anything I can help you with? Quite alright, thank you, Tomalak. We're investigating unusual spatial phenomena in this sector. Oh, I do hope you don't mean this anomaly. In fact, I do. Do you intend to stop me, Tomalak? Risky move so far from Romulan space. Not as risky as you might think, Picard. Bugger. You see, Picard, I know everything about you and your crew. I was able to preempt your every move, all thanks to my sponsor, Star Trek Fleet Command. This new program allows you to recruit legends from Federation history, crew your most famous starships, explore the galaxy, and engage in global battles. Once I had the program, I was able to learn all about your crew and their special abilities and bonuses, and discover every minute detail of the Enterprise herself. And using this game, we have honed our battle tactics to perfection. But before I blow you out the sky, I'll give you a fair chance. You can play the game for free if you use my link in the description or scan the QR code on screen. Speaking of Q's, I've been coming to know him quite well. He's told me so much, Picard. Right now, the Q Continuum Part 1 is marking the game's 6th anniversary, running from November 2nd. So there's never been a better time to start playing. Completing the challenge will unlock the new Epic Starfleet Q, as well as the rare French Marshal Q and Mariachi Q. Not to mention new Chaos Tech, the new Vindicator refit, and a battle pass of your choice. Q? That hussy. And if new players log in every day for their first 7 days, they will receive daily rewards and the Romulan Captain Nero. Quite the handsome fellow, wouldn't you say, Captain? And all of this was easy to facilitate with the new independent archives, which allowed me to avoid the daily grind. You'll need this if you have any hope of beating me, Picard. Now, if you require more motivation, it may interest you to know that as new players, we have captured your Dr. Crusher and her son, Wesley. If you wish to see any of them again, then use the promo code CRUSHERS to unlock them yourself. End transmission. Orders, Captain. All hands, download Star Trek Fleet Command and engage.
Alright, back to the video. Today, we're going to be talking about the Regent class. Why? Primarily because I like it. I think it's a very good ship. I think it's a stunning ship. I think it's absolutely gorgeous. Drop dead gorgeous. And I think it's a good example of doing a clear evolution, of a design, whilst also developing it somewhat as well. It is that sort of incremental step forward. Sometimes ships end up looking a little bit too close to their original inspirations, but I think the Regent has several key differences compared to its Sovereign class predecessor, which make it distinctive in its own right. It's not like the Aurora class, which is literally just a TMP-ified Nova class, or indeed that silly TMP-ified Akira, which, no, stop it, that doesn't work. And indeed, it's a good evolution of that 24th century design. We've seen in other instances where that can go hideously wrong. Best case example, the Alita class from STO. Blimey, that's really quite horrific. And the other reason I want to talk about it is not just because it's a good example of aesthetic design evolution in STO and it's not hideous. I also want to talk about it because it is a good example of interwar/peacetime development and some of the problems and issues that you face when you're developing in an interwar space. So I think without any further ado, let's get into it. So I think the first thing we should actually look at is the development of the Sovereign class. What was the goal of the Sovereign project? When did the Sovereign project actually come into being? How was it developed? How was it conceived? So, is the Sovereign class a successor to the Galaxy class? No, not even slightly. It was never intended to replace Galaxy class. In terms of its heritage, you could probably say that it's, technically speaking, a descendant of the Probot class. That ship was created during the service life of the original run Ambassadors as basically a halfway house between original Ambassador class and the Galaxy class, since essentially what was happening is the Ambassador was doing perfectly well, but it was coming up a little bit short in combat. They were losing ships to, general attrition. So you needed something to keep up numbers, and also you wanted to incorporate some modernizations. You can't just print out the same ship for nearly 40 years. So that's actually its closest, the Sovereign's closest relation, is the Probot class. And it's a good example because, again, it's a more tactical version of the Ambassador class. Not hugely, still a ways to go to the advances of the 24th century, but definitely a little bit more tactical and updated for the times in which it was in, which were a lot more unstable compared to the Ambassador class. So then we run into the question of, okay, so is the Regent replacing the Sovereign class after only about 30 to 40 years in service? And, well, bearing in mind, the Sovereign class is itself actually quite a rushed development for a very specific threat in a very specific time period. And additionally, warships tend to have, comparatively speaking, shorter lifespans because, well, when they get outcompeted, it matters a lot more than when, say, your cargo ship gets outcompeted or your science ship gets outdone. So there's that to bear in mind when it comes to developing a successor to the Sovereign class. The other thing to bear in mind is that Starfleet didn't want the Odessey class to suffer the same fate of the Galaxy class, which is that the Galaxy class, well, at least in terms of the Flagship, and granted, we are looking at the Flagship, it found itself being used as a workhorse when it's meant to be this deep space, long-range explorer that can go out for years at a time. And we just simply never see that at least being done with the Enterprise. Again, maybe that's to do with Flagship duties, but it could also be because the Galaxy class was just too damn useful. And because Starfleet sort of had this top tier, this creme de la creme of the newest and most advanced starships, but this, icing was built off of a very unstable foundation of ships from the 23rd and early 24th century that were now incredibly outdated. So, in order to prevent the failures of the Galaxy class being repeated, Starfleet issued a requirement for a home fleet flagship, a successor to a Sovereign, a more complete battleship. The Sovereign was a battleship to be sure, but a fast battleship, and certainly in the grand scheme of things, only a little bit more potent than a Galaxy class. And certainly if we said it was a 2-on-1, 2 Galaxy classes against 1 Sovereign, I'd actually be favouring the Galaxy classes in that exchange. So that's to say that the Sovereign class was only an incremental improvement over the Galaxy class in terms of tactical capabilities. And that's because the Sovereign class was developed as an anti-Borg ship. In the grand scheme of things, it wasn't developed all that long after the launch of the Galaxy class. It was on a very condensed timetable. So it's using a lot of the same technology, really. It's just applying them in a more tactical way. The Sovereign class obviously enters service, and it serves in the Dominion War in limited numbers. As the 24th century advances, we'll see more and more of them produced into pretty substantial numbers. But as we go to the 25th century, we start to see some of the shortcomings of the Sovereign really manifest. For the starters, while for the day, Sovereign is actually very well protected because it actually has ablative armour, it's only got medium ablative armour. So it's not that heavy, and given that it is a battleship, it is anticipating taking quite a lot of punishment. As I said before, it only has a slight increase of firepower over the Galaxy, with a couple of things that make the difference. So twin torpedo launchers front and back, and a quantum torpedo launcher. These are the only things that are really distinguishing it from the Galaxy in the grand scheme of things. It also had quite vulnerable engines. Not the only ship to have that problem, but it was a problem, and it was a pretty consistent problem. There's a reason the Scimitar was able to comparatively easily knock the Enterprise E out of warp. It also suffers from a exposed bridge, which, in the period in which the Sovereign is built, is actually quite unusual. By this point, Starfleet is, if not completely embedding the bridge inside the hull, then certainly giving it a little bit of flanking cover. It's not protruding out the top of the ship so much. If you look at ships like the Akira, while there is a visible bridge dome, it's shielded from the port and starboard by the large booms, and as well it's also shielded from the back by the torpedo pod. So it's relatively protected. It's very hard to pick out the bridge on the Sabre class at all, although it's probably the closest to the Sovereign. Similar to the Akira, the Steamrunner again has a little bit of cover on its left and right, and the bridge on the Norway class is recessed back towards the spine. The Sovereign, however, has this very unusual, basically Aztec pyramid design, which puts the bridge front and center, so in a head-on, you can very easily see the bridge and take a shot at it. The other thing that the Sovereign really struggled with was achieving true fire superiority. That is, the ability to put out such an amount of fire that it forces the enemy to break off. The Sovereign is designed as a damage over time specialist, and this largely comes from fighting the Borg. You're anticipating a long fight. But you compare this to what I mentioned previously with the assault battleships of the Dominion War, the Negvar, the Hutet, the Jem'Hadar battleship, ships which have a colossal front-on firepower, which basically, if you get in the front arc of, you're dead, certainly at close range. And this leads us to the development of the Regent class, which I must stress is not a refit. The structure of the Regent class is completely new. It's a completely new structure. There is no refitting going on here at all. It is much longer than the Sovereign. It is 755 meters long. This is a big ship, and this is a far more ambitious design than the Sovereign. It's using, obviously, Odessey level tech, so you're going to see an awful lot of crossover with the Odessey class. So, it is 755 meters long, 254 meters wide, with a height of 79 meters, with somewhere in the region of 22 decks. It has a crew capacity of about 1,500, and additionally can accommodate up to 3,000 passengers. That can be passengers or civilians. Largely depends upon the role of the ship, but if it's doing a large diplomatic event, which is very possible, you're going to need huge amounts of space. That's just something that Next Generation never really drove home is how colossal diplomatic meetings are in terms of how many make up the actual diplomatic parties. Then you've got their security people, then you've got their advisors and their staff and their, all these support people around them that quickly adds up if you're hosting a major diplomatic summit on board your Starship. It also features, interestingly, in lieu of a large captain's yacht, which I think is a missed opportunity, but it features a huge planetary sensor dome, so it's very good for close observation and some scientific duties, which, if it's just going around doing sort of scientific investigations, particularly as part of diplomacy, that's very handy to have. Doing joint science missions with prospective allies has always been a favourite tactic of the Federation. It's been shown to build good relations. So, it features vast diplomatic suites, far beyond the scale of anything that you would have seen on a Galaxy-class, huge conference rooms, banquet halls, the lot. It's there. Same goes for the crew. You're going to have an entire park inside that ship. Probably a substantial aquatic environment, not only for cetacean ops, but also just for relaxation, for a little bit of R&R for the crew. Ample holodecks, vast entertainment facilities. This ship really does have it all in terms of that. It really is the pinnacle of luxury battleship. What the Galaxy class pioneered, this has it in spades. It also has an unassailable system of protection. If you're on a Regent class, you're about as safe as you can be. Saboteurs and agitators and evil revolutionaries be damned, they're not getting to you, at least from without. And it has high performance at warp speed. However, it does have less range than the Odessey class, which is to be expected. It's not doing the same deep space missions that the Odessey class is. Because there's less of a need for long-range provisioning, that means that they don't just have to bog themselves down with all this bare essential equipment that you would need on a long-distance voyage. Instead, you can have a little bit more in terms of bells and whistles. Now, in terms of armament, it has 4 forward torpedo tubes, no aft torpedo tubes at all. It also has quantum torpedoes, photon torpedoes, transphasic torpedoes. These are all for different purposes. Your photon torpedoes are your general purpose ammunition, your quantum torpedoes, that's for taking out large targets, and your transphasic torpedoes, that's for doing critical damage. That's really for disabling ships without having to knock down their shields and go through all that palaver. It also has, mounted to the front of the saucer, 7 pulse phaser cannons, which gives it this enormous frontal firepower. This means that if a Regent class is bearing down on you, you need to get the hell out of the way. It also has an unknown number of phaser arrays which are concealed beneath the armoured hull. So I suppose I should talk about that armoured hull, the protection, which is legendary. So, as well as having your full shield suite that you can expect in the 25th century, a regenerative shield suite, the hull is fully protected under a layer of ceramite armour. This armour is simultaneously dispersive, which means that upon the impact of energy weapons, it will disperse that energy across a wide area and so won't be penetrated. And it is also reactive, which is important when dealing with kinetic projectiles, like a photon torpedo. This means effectively that it can harden at a point of impact, while the rest of the hull remains pliable soft, so that it can actually resist penetration of kinetic projectiles. And, to an extent, because of nanite technology, this is self-regenerating. So unlike your ablative armour, which would have worn off, this armour can regenerate over time, so there's no need to visit a starbase to get new sections of ablative armour, like you had to do in the old days. In terms of propulsion, you have, of course, 2 warp engines. These are lesser in performance than the Odessey, as previously mentioned. However, unlike the Odessey class, which is putting all of it into its long-range capabilities, this has far better protection. The engines themselves are protected by armoured carapaces. Now, this does have a downside in that it lowers the overall lifespan of the engine, but it means that also you're far less likely to get easily knocked out of warp, because the engine nacelles themselves are protected. It also has 4 impulse units, 2 in the Saucer, like on the Sovereign class, and then also 2 in the warp pylons. This is something that was probably inspired by the Romulan Neo-Rexan class. Certainly it was one of the first ships to do it in the 24th century, and it gives the Regent class an enormous amount of maneuverability. It would probably be more maneuverable than its Sovereign predecessor, because it's just got that much more in those 2 sets of impulse engines. So this is an extremely fast ship despite its bigger size and heavier armor. That's how much the technology is advanced. It also has 4 distinct shuttle bays. This is deliberately sectioned off so that if you're dealing with particularly very, how shall we say, tense negotiations, you don't have to have the 2 sides come into the same shuttle bay. They can be given their own space, and you can slowly move the delegations closer to one another without there being a fight in the corridors. So you have your shuttle bays that are mounted on the Saucer section, which are essentially your executive shuttle bays, and the doors are 6 meters tall and 12 meters across. Your aftmost shuttle bays are a little bit smaller. They are your flight decks, so that's where most of the comings and goings for daily operations will be taking place. The doors for those are 10 meters by 10 meters. What we see in the Regent is a little bit of incremental progress in every single area, and the result is that we see an exponential jump in capabilities. By speccing everything up incrementally, the result is exponentially greater in its capabilities than its predecessor. So I think to wrap up, the Regent class is the ultimate embodiment of the might and magnificence of Starfleet and of the Federation. It is the ultimate in elegance and luxury, and it is a perfect demonstration of how form follows function, and how elegant that unity, when done right, can be, especially compared to the alternatives. It is very comfortable being a warship. It's not like in the late 24th century where you have these ships that are super aggressive looking, the Akira, the Sovereign, the Steamrunner. These are very mean, meaty fighting ships that really want to bare their teeth at you, that would start a bar brawl. No. The Regent class is a smart-dressed man who's about 6'2" and weighs about 100 kilos. You're not going to mess with it, but you don't need to, because he's so delightful and pleasant and conversational. Why would you? And I think that really says a lot about where the Federation sits in the 25th century. Unlike the 24th century Federation, which actually sort of had almost an internal revolution against the peaceniks of the 2360s, going into the 2370s, where you have these hyper-aggressive ships, you have this beautiful compromise in between, where you still have a very, very potent fighting ship, but also an extremely elegant, just downright gorgeous flagship. I don't usually like Starfleet ships, and when I do like a Starfleet ship, I think you know it's for a good reason. I think the Regent class is just such an example. So it is comfortable as a warship, it is a great battleship, and it is also comfortable doing science and diplomacy and peacetime duties. It is a great starship. And it reminds me of that old saying, Si vis pacem, para bellum. So, thank you all for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you to Star Trek Fleet Command for sponsoring this video. Check them out, link in the description. And I'll see you all in the next video.